Let me go to Dan, who I've admired, and we've worked together from time to time over the years. His advice to Congress, to conservatives on economic principles has been invaluable for as long as I can just about remember. So if you'd make your opening comments, please.
Well, thank you, Tony. Normally I talk to people about taxes. I love being a boring economist and talking about marginal tax rates and capital formation, but I want to talk about spending for a minute or two. Because frankly, if government spending continues to skyrocket, we're never going to have good tax policy. If we had the kind of government our founding fathers set up, with their federal government of less than 5% of GDP, it's almost impossible to have a bad tax system. And if we allow the federal government to go to 40% of GDP, it's impossible to have a good tax system. So before we start focusing on how to make the tax code better, and I've been spending 25 years doing that, we better figure out what to do about government spending. And let me give you some frightening numbers. When Bill Clinton left office, the federal government was down to 18.5% of GDP. A lot higher than a lot of us would want, but very, very low compared to most other industrialized economies in the world. We were making progress. Government was shrinking, not because we were actually cutting it, although that would be great. We were letting the private sector grow faster than the government. And that's really all you need to do for success. That's why government fell. We got good people in charge of Congress. They boxed in Clinton, and Clinton wasn't as radical as Obama to begin with anyhow. We let the productive sector of the economy expand faster than the government. We were making progress. Unfortunately, in the name of so-called compassionate conservatism, we've thrown out some quotes here. Probably the most disturbing quote I heard this decade, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it exactly, was our last president, George W. Bush, saying, "When somebody's hurting, it's government's job to help." And as a result, under the Bush years, the federal government budget went from $1.8 trillion to $3.5 trillion. Now, I'm not a math genius, but 1.8 to 3.5 is almost a doubling in just 8 years. In other words, this is not a Democratic problem. It's a Washington problem. It's a problem of big government. And most of that new spending was not for Iraq or Homeland Security or for national defense. It was the no bureaucrat left behind education bill. It was the corrupt farm bills. It was the pork-filled transportation bills. It was the giant new Medicare expansion. It was the federal government bailing out the corrupt politicians in Louisiana for the fiasco of Hurricane Katrina. These are all mistakes that Republicans made when Republicans were in charge because they forgot the lessons of the Contract for America. They forgot the lessons of Ronald Reagan. They came to Washington thinking it was a cesspool, and they decided it was a hot tub instead. Now, that's actually the optimistic part of my opening remarks. Because let me tell you where we're heading. Obama comes in and gives us $800 billion of pork on top of all the mess we had in the last 8 years. And now he wants $1 trillion plus of the same people who run the post office to start doing our health care. That's bad, but that's actually not even the biggest problem we're looking forward to. If you look at the long-term forecast made by the Congressional Budget Office of what's going to happen to the federal budget between now and 2082, they do these 75-year forecasts, what do you see? They estimate that the federal government, which is now about 25% of GDP, a lot higher than when Clinton left office, 18.5% of GDP, we're going to go from a federal government consuming 25% of GDP. In the optimistic scenario, it's going to go up to 45% of GDP. In the pessimistic scenario, it's going to 67% of GDP. Now, you add in 15% of GDP minimum for state and local governments, and we will have a bigger government than any European welfare state, even France and Sweden. I don't know if that means we have to stop using deodorant and train our army to surrender if there's a war, but we are going to be a European welfare state. And I guarantee you when that happens, we're going to have European-style economic conditions. Higher perpetual long-term unemployment, lower living standards. You cannot get away from it. If government is big, the productive sector is small. It is inevitable, and it is built into our current policy. Because of all the entitlement programs, because of demographic changes, even if every single initiative Obama tried to do failed, we still have baked into the cake a giant welfare state in America. That's what we need to worry about. And Tony, you mentioned deficits. This, of course, implies enormous deficits, but I don't think that's the problem. Sweden, until the current recession, had a budget surplus. Would I trade places with Sweden? No. Because people are poorer in Sweden, because government is bigger in Sweden. I don't care that Sweden taxes this much and spends this much. I agree with Milton Friedman. I'd rather spend this much even if it means we have a small deficit. But the problem is, because government's expanding, we know that taxes are going to go up, but it's going to be like a dog chasing its tail. The politicians will spend more, then they'll say we have to raise taxes to close the deficit. That, of course, won't work, so they'll say we have to raise taxes again, and we'll just get into this downward spiral that we had in the 60s and the 70s. That's what we're heading toward. And what is the fundamental moral aspect of this? And I'll shut up with this. The politicians in Washington say it's their job to take care of us. Well, there are a couple of million people in America who are being taken care of by government. Their housing, their health care, their food, everything is being taken care of by government. Who are these 2 million plus people? They're called prisoners in our penal system. Because that's what the welfare state is. It's a prison for the human soul. It's making pets out of all of us. It's going to put us in a little cage, control our freedom, control our lives. That's what we need to fight against. Because it's not just that government's going to get big and our long-term growth rate is going to go to 1% like it is in France. Yes, that's bad news, and mostly I talk about that. But what this really means, and why all of us really have to fight, if government gets that big and the American people wind up adopting this European mindset that it's okay to sit on your brains every day and let someone else take care of you, that is going to destroy what made America great, and that's why we have to fight it. And I hope the Steamboat Institute Conference is the start. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.